A lonely widow befriended a sick child. This single act of kindness would ripple through decades, though Eleanor Bennett could never have imagined how profoundly it would transform her life. The autumn wind rattled her kitchen window as she stared at the framed photograph of her late husband, Richard. 3 years had passed since the cancer took him, yet the emptiness in her modest suburban home seemed to expand with each passing season. Eleanor traced the edge of the silver frame with trembling fingers. 62 years old, with fading auburn hair now streaked with gray, she had grown accustomed to the silence. Her children had long moved across the country. Phone calls and occasional visits were poor substitutes for the family dinners that once filled this house with laughter. "Happy anniversary, Richard," she whispered to the empty room. 28 years they'd had together. Not enough. Never enough. Outside, maple leaves spiraled to the ground in a dance of amber and crimson. Eleanor wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and surveyed her garden. Once Richard's pride and joy, now barely maintained through her half-hearted efforts. The rose bushes needed pruning. The bird feeder hung empty. Everything felt like too much effort these days. Her neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, had stopped inviting Eleanor to her weekly bridge games after being declined 12 times in a row. The church group sent occasional casseroles, but even their persistence was waning. Eleanor hadn't meant to isolate herself, but grief had a way of building walls brick by brick until you couldn't remember how to dismantle them. The doctor had prescribed pills for her situational depression, as he called it. The orange bottle sat mostly untouched on her nightstand. What was the point? Pills couldn't fill the Richard-shaped void in her life. The community hospital sat just 3 blocks from Eleanor's home. She'd avoided it since Richard's final days there, the antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting triggering memories she preferred to keep buried. But when her kitchen sink refused to stop leaking one Tuesday morning, she found herself reluctantly dialing her neighbor's son, a plumber who worked late hours and could only meet her at the hospital cafe where his wife volunteered. Just a quick signature on the estimate, he'd promised. The hospital seemed to have grown larger in her absence, more labyrinthine. Eleanor clutched her purse tightly against her chest as she navigated the bustling corridors, flinching at the overhead announcements and beeping machines. By the time she located the small cafe tucked away on the ground floor, her heart was racing uncomfortably. "Mrs. Bennett?" A young nurse with kind eyes approached. "Are you all right? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine," Eleanor replied automatically. "Just looking for the cafe." "You're here. Would you like me to help you find a seat?" Eleanor shook her head, embarrassed by the concern. "Thank you, but I can manage." The cafe was mercifully quiet, populated by a few staff members in scrubs sipping coffee. Eleanor claimed a corner table, positioning herself with her back to the wall so she could watch the entrance for her neighbor's son. The minutes ticked by. She checked her watch repeatedly, anxiety mounting with each passing moment. After 20 minutes, a text message chimed on her rarely used phone. The plumber was delayed by an emergency call. Another 45 minutes at least. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her lukewarm tea. She should leave, retreat to the safety of her empty house. But the thought of navigating the hospital corridors again so soon made her pulse quicken uncomfortably. That's when she first noticed the boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, rail-thin with a mop of unruly dark hair. He sat alone at a table by the window, a book open before him, though his attention seemed fixed on the parking lot outside. What caught Eleanor's eye was the way his legs dangled from the chair, not quite reaching the floor, and the IV pole standing sentinel beside him like an unwelcome friend. He wore blue-striped pajamas beneath a hospital gown, and even from across the room, Eleanor could see the pallor of his skin, the unmistakable complexion of the chronically ill. Something about his solitude struck a chord within her. Perhaps it was the careful way he turned each page, or how he occasionally glanced toward the cafe entrance with poorly concealed hope, as if expecting someone who hadn't arrived. Eleanor knew that look. She'd worn it herself, waiting for visitors who found reasons not to come. Before she could reconsider, Eleanor found herself crossing the cafe, tea in hand. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the chair opposite the boy. He looked up, startled by the interruption. Large brown eyes studied her face with unexpected intensity. "No, ma'am," he replied after a moment, his voice softer than she'd anticipated. "I'm waiting for someone who's running late," Eleanor explained, settling into the chair before she could change her mind. "I thought perhaps we could keep each other company." "I'm Eleanor." "I'm Leo," the boy replied, closing his book carefully. "Leo Reyes." Up close, Eleanor could see the dark circles beneath his eyes and the unnatural thinness of his wrists. An identification bracelet hung loosely around one arm, and a port for medication was visible beneath his collarbone. "That looks like a serious book for someone your age," Eleanor observed, nodding toward the thick volume. Leo's expression brightened marginally. "It's about the solar system. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons? That's more than any other planet." "I didn't know that," Eleanor replied truthfully. "My favorite is Europa. Scientists think there might be an ocean under all the ice, maybe even life." His fingers traced the edge of the page where a glossy photo showed a striated white and tan sphere. "I'm going to be an astronaut scientist when I grow up. I'll visit Europa someday." The matter-of-fact confidence in his voice created a lump in Eleanor's throat. How long had it been since she'd heard such unfettered optimism? Such certainty about the future? "That sounds like a fine plan," she managed. "Though I imagine it's quite cold on Europa. -260 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface," Leo informed her seriously. "But I'll have a special suit. NASA is working on them already." Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "Well, I hope they have it ready in time for your mission." A comfortable silence settled between them as Leo returned to his book and Eleanor sipped her tea. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows, blurring the parking lot into a watercolor of grays and blues. Eleanor found herself strangely content in this moment. The first time in months she'd sat with another person without feeling the pressing need to escape. "Are you sick too?" Leo asked suddenly, looking up from his book. The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard. "No, I'm not sick. Just waiting for someone." Leo nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "Most people who come here are either sick or visiting sick people, or they work here." He studied her with that same disconcerting intensity. "You don't look like a doctor." "I'm definitely not a doctor," Eleanor agreed. "What about you? Are you here often?" She winced at her clumsy phrasing. 3 days a week for treatments. Sometimes more if my counts are bad." He spoke with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to discussing his illness. "I have leukemia. All acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but I'm in remission now. These are just maintenance treatments to make sure the bad cells don't come back." Eleanor's heart constricted. "That sounds difficult." Leo shrugged with the peculiar resilience of children. "It's not so bad anymore. The first part was worse. Induction, they called it. I lost all my hair and threw up a lot. My mom cried every night when she thought I was sleeping." His expression clouded briefly. "She has to work double shifts now to pay the hospital. That's why I wait here sometimes. The nurses let me read when I'm feeling okay." The matter-of-fact way he described his situation, alone, battling a disease Eleanor could barely pronounce, worrying about his mother's tears, stirred something within her that had lain dormant since Richard's death. A protective instinct, a need to offer comfort. "My husband had cancer too," she found herself saying. "He loved to read while getting his treatments. Said it transported him somewhere else for a while." Leo's eyes widened with interest. "Did he get better?" Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. He died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Leo said with such genuine empathy that Eleanor had to blink back sudden tears. "Was he nice?" The unexpected question prompted a small laugh. "Yes, very nice. He was a high school science teacher. He would have loved your book about Jupiter's moons." "Does it make you sad to talk about him?" Leo asked, watching her carefully. Eleanor considered this. "Sometimes. But sometimes it feels good to remember the happy parts." Leo nodded sagely. "That's how I feel about my dad. He left when I was 5. Mom says it's okay to remember the good times, like when he taught me to ride a bike." Before Eleanor could respond, a harried-looking woman in scrubs rushed into the cafe, scanning the tables anxiously before spotting Leo. Relief visibly washed over her tired features. "Leo! There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Your lab results are back, and Dr. Patel wants to discuss them." She noticed Eleanor and offered a distracted smile. "Thank you for keeping him company. He's supposed to stay in the pediatric ward." "I was bored, Mom," Leo protested, carefully marking his place in the book. "And Ms. Eleanor is nice. Her husband liked science too." Leo's mother, Eleanor now noticed the family resemblance in their dark eyes and the curve of their smiles, extended her hand. "Maria Reyes. I'm so sorry if he bothered you. Leo makes friends wherever he goes." Eleanor Bennett. And he was no bother at all. Eleanor shook the offered hand, noting the calluses and chapped skin. "Working hands? He's been teaching me about Jupiter's moons." Maria's smile softened with love and pride. "Astronomy is his latest obsession? Every night it's one more chapter, Mom, until I have to practically pry the books from his hands." She checked her watch. "We really should go, Leo. Doctor, Patel is waiting." Leo gathered his book and stood, the movement causing his IV pole to rattle. "Will you be here next Tuesday, Miss?" "Eleanor? That's when I come for my big treatment." The question caught Eleanor by surprise. She glanced at Maria, uncertain. "You don't have to," Maria began, but Eleanor interrupted gently. "I'd like to, if that's all right. Perhaps I could bring a book we could read together." The words emerged before Eleanor had fully formed the thought, yet she felt no urge to retract them. Leo's face brightened. "About space?" "About space," Eleanor confirmed with a smile. As Leo and his mother departed, Eleanor remained at the table, her tea long forgotten. The plumber's son would arrive soon, but her thoughts were elsewhere, floating among Jupiter's many moons, wondering what stories might capture a brave boy's imagination, and feeling, for the first time in 3 years, the faintest stirring of purpose. The following Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, golden October sunshine spilling across Eleanor's kitchen floor as she carefully wrapped 2 books in tissue paper. After her chance meeting with Leo, she had visited the local bookstore, spending nearly 2 hours in the astronomy section before selecting The Mysteries of Our Solar System and Women in Space: 50 Amazing Stories of Female Astronauts. She had also, somewhat impulsively, baked oatmeal cookies that morning, Richard's special recipe with extra cinnamon and raisins. The kitchen had filled with a familiar aroma that brought both pain and comfort, like pressing on a bruise to remember its healing. Eleanor checked her appearance in the hallway mirror before leaving, something she hadn't bothered with in months. She had applied a touch of lipstick and secured her silver-streaked hair with the tortoiseshell clip Richard had given her on their 20th anniversary. Not vanity, she told herself, just consideration for others. The hospital seemed less intimidating this time. Eleanor navigated the corridors with newfound confidence, nodding to a nurse who recognized her from the previous week. The pediatric oncology ward was located on the 3rd floor, its entrance marked by colorful murals of jungle animals and smiling suns. "I'm here to see Leo Reyes," she told the receptionist, suddenly uncertain of the protocol. "I'm a friend of the family." The young woman checked her computer. "Leo's in the treatment room. Let me check if visitors are allowed during his procedure." She made a quick call, then smiled. "You can go right in. Room 312, down the hall on the left." Eleanor found Leo reclined in a large chair, connected to an IV machine that methodically pumped medication into his thin arm. His face lit up when he spotted her in the doorway. "Ms. Eleanor, you came." "Of course I came," she replied, pleased by his enthusiasm. "I promised, didn't I?" Maria, who sat beside her son reading through paperwork, looked up with surprise and genuine warmth. "Eleanor, what a lovely surprise. Leo's been talking about you all week?" Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at this revelation. "I've brought some books," she said, placing the tissue-wrapped parcels on Leo's lap. "And cookies, if you're allowed to have them." Leo looked to his mother questioningly. Maria nodded. "As long as you don't eat them all at once. Your stomach's been sensitive." With careful fingers, Leo unwrapped the books, his expression transforming with delight as he examined the covers. "Mom, look! This one has stories about female astronauts. Did you know women go to space too?" "Of course I did," Maria replied with a smile. "Women can do anything men can do, except pee standing up," Leo added seriously. "Leo!" Maria exclaimed, as Eleanor burst into unexpected laughter. Leo grinned, unrepentant. "That's what Nurse Jake said." For the next 2 hours, Eleanor sat with Leo and Maria as the medication dripped steadily into Leo's veins. She read aloud from the astronaut book while Leo interrupted with questions and commentary. Maria eventually excused herself for a quick trip to the cafeteria, returning with coffee for Eleanor and herself. "You really don't have to stay the whole time," Maria said quietly, while Leo was distracted by a particularly interesting chapter about the Mars rovers. "These sessions can last 4 hours sometimes." "I don't mind," Eleanor replied truthfully. "I have nowhere else I need to be." Maria studied her with those perceptive dark eyes that Leo had inherited. "Leo mentioned your husband passed away." "I'm very sorry." Eleanor nodded, accepting the condolence. "Cancer too. Pancreatic. It was quick in the end." "That's both a blessing and a curse," Maria observed softly. "Not enough time to say goodbye, but less suffering." The simple understanding in Maria's voice, free from the awkward platitudes Eleanor had grown accustomed to, felt like a balm. "Yes, exactly that. Leo's father couldn't handle the diagnosis," Maria continued, her gaze drifting to her son. He was gone 3 weeks after we found out. Said he wasn't built for this kind of thing. The bitterness in her voice was tempered by old resignation, as if any of us are built for watching our child suffer. Eleanor reached out impulsively, covering Maria's hand with her own. You're doing it, though. You're here. That's what matters. Maria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Some days I don't know how. Between the medical bills, the double shifts at the hospital, trying to keep our apartment. She trailed off, shaking her head. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger, Eleanor said gently. No history, no expectations. You're not a stranger anymore. Leo piped up, apparently having been listening to their conversation. You're our friend now, right, Missy? Eleanor? The simple declaration warmed something in Eleanor's chest. Yes, I suppose I am. As autumn deepened into winter, Eleanor's Tuesday visits became a fixed point in her weekly routine. Sometimes she would arrive bearing new books or small gifts, a soft knit hat when Leo's hair began to thin again from the treatments, a travel chest set for the long hours in the treatment chair, homemade soup for Maria, who had developed a persistent cough from exhaustion. Eleanor learned that Leo's favorite color was electric blue, like lightning, and that he was allergic to strawberries but loved peaches. She discovered that Maria worked as a phlebotomist at the very same hospital where Leo received treatment, a cruel irony that at least allowed her to check on him between shifts. In turn, Eleanor found herself sharing pieces of her life that had remained locked away since Richard's death. She told Leo about Richard's infamous failed attempts at growing prize-winning tomatoes, about their cross-country road trip in a temperamental Volkswagen van, about the time Richard accidentally set off the fire alarm while trying to cook her a surprise anniversary dinner. He sounds funny. Leo observed one snowy December afternoon as he meticulously colored a Christmas card for his favorite nurse. I bet he would have made a good dad. The comment caught Eleanor off guard. We couldn't have children, she said after a moment. We tried for years, but it just wasn't meant to be. Leo considered this with his characteristic thoughtfulness. That's sad. You would make a good grandma. Eleanor blinked rapidly, turning away to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes. Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. As Christmas approached, Eleanor found her once empty calendar filling with unexpected commitments. She helped organize a holiday book drive for the pediatric ward. She joined Maria and Leo for the hospital's annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony. She even invited several nurses who had become familiar faces to her home for tea, the first time she had entertained guests since Richard's funeral. Her house, which had felt cavernous in its emptiness for 3 years, now seemed to hold echoes of laughter and conversation. She caught herself humming while dusting the bookshelves. The pills on her nightstand were forgotten, replaced by a stack of astronomy books she was working through so she could keep up with Leo's endless questions. You look different, her daughter commented during their Christmas video call. More present. Eleanor couldn't disagree. Something had shifted as imperceptibly as the changing seasons, yet just as transformative. On Christmas Eve, Eleanor delivered carefully wrapped presents to the hospital, a telescope for Leo and a spa gift certificate for Maria, who protested it was too much until Eleanor firmly insisted. In return, they presented her with a framed photograph of the 3 of them at the tree lighting ceremony, Leo's thin arm wrapped around Eleanor's waist, Maria leaning in from the other side, all 3 smiling despite the visible exhaustion in their eyes. So you remember you're not alone anymore, Leo explained. Eleanor placed the photograph on her mantel beside Richard's picture. That night, for the first time since his death, she spoke aloud to his image without tears. I met someone who reminds me of you, she told, the familiar smile frozen in time. He's curious about everything just like you were. I think I'm helping them. And they're certainly helping me. The new year brought challenges. Leo's remission faltered in February, necessitating more aggressive treatments that left him weak and nauseous. Eleanor adjusted her schedule without hesitation, sometimes spending entire days at the hospital when Maria couldn't get time off work. She read to Leo when his eyes were too tired to focus on the pages himself. She learned to interpret the various monitors and machines, alerting nurses when something seemed amiss. She held the basin when the nausea overwhelmed him, and wiped his forehead with cool cloths when fever took hold. You don't have to do this, Maria said one evening, finding Eleanor still at Leo's bedside long after visiting hours had technically ended. The nurses had stopped trying to enforce the rules with her weeks ago. I know, Eleanor replied simply, continuing to knit the blue scarf she had started for Leo's upcoming birthday. I want to. By spring, Leo's health had stabilized once more, though the doctors remained cautiously optimistic rather than celebratory. Eleanor had become such a fixture in the oncology ward that new patients sometimes mistook her for staff. She knew the cafeteria workers by name, had memorized the hospital's labyrinthine layout, and kept track of the rotation of oncologists with the efficiency of a longtime employee. On Leo's 9th birthday in April, Eleanor helped Maria transform their small apartment into a space-themed wonderland, complete with hanging planets made from painted styrofoam balls and stars that glowed in the dark. Only 5 guests attended, fellow patients well enough to leave the hospital, but the joy on Leo's face as he blew out his candles made the weeks of planning worthwhile. "Make a wish," Eleanor encouraged as the flames flickered. Leo closed his eyes tightly, his thin face scrunched in concentration, before extinguishing all 9 candles with one determined breath. Later, as the party wound down and Leo's energy began to flag, Eleanor found him sitting alone on the small balcony, gazing up at the evening sky. "Penny for your thoughts?" she said, settling beside him. "I can't see many stars here," he replied, disappointment evident in his voice. "Too many city lights?" Eleanor followed his gaze to the hazy urban sky, where only the brightest stars managed to pierce through the light pollution. "When I was a girl, I lived in the countryside. The stars were so bright they cast shadows on clear nights." Leo turned to her, eyes wide. "Really? Really? My father taught me all the constellations. Orion, Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, and Minor." She pointed to a bright spot overhead. "That's actually not a star at all, it's Jupiter. My favorite planet," Leo said with a smile. "Do you think I'll ever see the real stars, miss?" "Eleanor? The way they're supposed to look?" Something in his voice, a fragile hope tinged with uncertainty, tightened Eleanor's throat. "Of course you will, sweetheart. When you're better, perhaps we could take a trip somewhere away from the city lights. The 3 of us." Leo leaned against her shoulder, suddenly seeming younger than his 9 years. "I'd like that." That night, as Eleanor drove home, an idea began to form. Nebulous at first, then taking shape with increasing clarity. Richard had left her well provided for, between his life insurance and pension. The modest cabin they had purchased in the Catskills years ago as a potential retirement home had sat empty since his death, maintained by a property management company but otherwise unused. A place away from city lights. A place to see the stars. The following week, Eleanor invited Maria for coffee after one of Leo's shorter treatment sessions. As Leo sat nearby, absorbed in a new comic book about a teenage astronaut, Eleanor outlined her proposal. "The doctors mentioned Leo needs a break between treatment cycles," she began carefully. 2 weeks, they said, before the next round begins." Maria nodded wearily. "Yes, but I can't take that much time off work. I've already used all my sick days and vacation time." "What if Leo came to stay with me?" Eleanor suggested, her heart beating rapidly with unexpected nervousness. "At Richard's and my cabin in the Catskills. It's peaceful there, clean mountain air, and the stars at night are magnificent. You could join us on weekends or whenever you can get away." Maria stared at her, clearly caught off guard. "Eleanor, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Eleanor interrupted gently. "The cabin sits empty most of the year. It has 3 bedrooms, a fireplace, a small library Richard filled with science books." She leaned forward, earnest now. "Leo needs rest, Maria. Somewhere quiet, away from the hospital environment. And she paused, searching for the right words. "I need this too." Maria studied her intently, maternal protectiveness warring with practical necessity. "You've become very important to Leo," she said finally. "To both of us. And you to me," Eleanor replied, the simple truth of it warming her from within. After consulting with Leo's doctors, who agreed that a change of environment might benefit his recovery between treatment cycles, arrangements were made. Eleanor spent a whirlwind week preparing the cabin, airing out rooms, stocking the pantry, installing a new telescope on the back deck, and ensuring the internet connection was strong enough for Leo's virtual school sessions. When she finally brought Leo and Maria up the winding mountain road to the secluded cabin, the expression on Leo's face as he took in the towering pines and endless blue sky made all the preparation worthwhile. "It's like a spaceship landing in the forest," he breathed, staring at the A-frame structure with its large windows and wraparound deck. That first evening, after Maria reluctantly departed for her Sunday night shift, promising to return the following weekend, Eleanor led Leo onto the back deck. The spring night was cool but not uncomfortable, the sky overhead transforming from indigo to black as thousands of stars gradually appeared. "Oh," Leo whispered, his face tilted upward in wonder. "They're everywhere." Eleanor adjusted the telescope she had purchased specifically for this moment. "This is just the beginning," she promised. "Wait until your eyes fully adjust to the dark." For 2 hours they sat together under the vast canopy of stars. Eleanor pointed out constellations, planets, and passing satellites, while Leo absorbed every word with rapt attention, occasionally checking reference points in the astronomy books they had brought outside. "Ms. Eleanor?" Leo's voice was drowsy as she finally ushered him inside, the mountain air having grown too chilly. "Yes, sweetheart? I think this might be the best day of my life." The simple declaration lodged in Eleanor's heart like a physical thing. Later, after tucking Leo into bed in the room that had once been designated as a nursery in those hopeful early years of her marriage, Eleanor stepped onto the deck alone. "You would have loved him, Richard," she whispered to the star-filled sky. "He has your curiosity, your wonder." For the first time since Richard's death, the ache of his absence was matched by the fullness of a new presence in her life. The 2 weeks at the cabin unfolded like a gentle dream. Leo's strength improved visibly with each passing day, his appetite returning as Eleanor prepared Richard's favorite recipes: pancakes shaped like planets, hearty vegetable soups, and chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. They established a comfortable routine, mornings spent with Leo's virtual schoolwork, afternoons exploring the surrounding woods or reading by the fireplace, evenings devoted to stargazing when the weather permitted. Eleanor taught Leo to identify bird calls and showed him how to fill the feeders that attracted a colorful array of visitors. "My dad never did stuff like this with me," Leo commented one afternoon as Eleanor demonstrated how to skip stones across the small pond behind the cabin. "He was always too busy." "Richard loved the outdoors," Eleanor replied, selecting a flat stone from their collection. "He's the one who taught me how to skip stones. The trick is in the wrist motion, see?" She sent a stone dancing across the water's surface, creating 5 distinct ripples before it sank. Leo attempted to mimic her technique, his thin arm struggling with the motion. His stone plopped unceremoniously into the water. "That's okay," Eleanor encouraged. "It takes practice." Richard couldn't do it at first either. Leo tried again and again, his determination unwavering despite repeated failures. When his stone finally skipped, just once but definitively, his triumphant whoop echoed through the trees. "I did it!" "Did you see that, Missa?" "Eleanor?" "I skipped it!" "You certainly did." Eleanor laughed, caught up in his infectious joy. "Richard would be proud." Leo's smile faltered slightly. Do you think my dad would be proud too? If he knew I was sick but still trying hard things?" The question pierced Eleanor's heart. She knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "Any father worth his salt would be immensely proud of you, Leo Reyes. You are the bravest, most determined person I've ever met. If your father isn't proud, then that's his failing, not yours." Leo considered this, his dark eyes serious. "Sometimes I'm not brave. Sometimes at night in the hospital I get really scared. Being brave doesn't mean never being afraid," Eleanor told him gently. "It means feeling the fear and doing what needs to be done anyway. By that definition, you're the bravest person I know." Leo leaned forward suddenly, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce hug. "I'm glad I met you, Mrs. Eleanor." Eleanor held him close, this child who had somehow slipped past all her carefully constructed defenses. "I'm glad I met you too, sweetheart. More than you could possibly know." When Maria arrived that weekend, she barely recognized her son. Color had returned to Leo's cheeks, and he raced across the lawn to greet her with an energy she hadn't seen in months. "Mom! I learned to skip stones and identify bird calls and use a real telescope. And Ms. Eleanor says I can help plant a vegetable garden next week if the doctor says it's okay for me to stay longer." Maria looked to Eleanor, who stood on the porch watching their reunion with a warm smile. "The doctor called yesterday," Eleanor explained as Maria approached. "Leo's blood counts are stable. Dr. Patel said another week here might be beneficial before returning for the next treatment cycle." The relief in Maria's eyes was palpable. "I can't take more time off, but if you're sure it's not too much." "It's no trouble," Eleanor assured her. Quite the opposite, in fact. That evening, after Leo had finally succumbed to sleep, exhausted from showing his mother all his new discoveries, the two women sat on the deck with glasses of wine, a chorus of crickets providing gentle background music to their conversation. "I've never seen him like this," Maria said, gazing at the star-filled sky. So, normal. Like a regular kid, not a cancer patient. He is a regular kid, Eleanor replied. One who happens to be fighting an illness, but still a boy with dreams and curiosity and endless energy when he's feeling well. Maria turned to study Eleanor's profile in the dim light. You've given him something I couldn't, even though I've tried so hard. A chance to just be a child without the constant reminder of his illness. You've given him everything, Maria, Eleanor countered firmly. Your strength, your devotion, I'm just supplementing with a change of scenery. Maria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. When Leo was diagnosed, I thought my world was ending. I never imagined that in the middle of this nightmare we would find family. The word hung in the night air between them, delicate yet powerful. Family, Eleanor echoed softly, testing its weight and finding it fit perfectly. As spring melted into summer, a new pattern emerged. Leo would undergo his treatment cycles at the hospital, with Eleanor a constant presence alongside Maria, and then recover at the cabin during the breaks between treatments. The doctors noted with cautious optimism that Leo's body seemed to respond better to the medications after his rejuvenating stays in the mountains. Eleanor's once empty calendar now overflowed with appointments, activities, and responsibilities. She joined the hospital's parent support group, though she carefully navigated questions about her exact relationship to Leo. Family friend became her standard response, though it felt increasingly inadequate to describe the bond they had formed. Her own children, initially surprised by her sudden involvement with a sick child and his mother, began to visit more frequently, curious about the people who had drawn their mother out of her grief-induced isolation. He's good for you, Mom, her daughter observed during a weekend visit to the cabin, watching as Eleanor helped Leo construct a birdhouse, their heads bent together in concentration. I haven't seen you this engaged since before Dad died. He's taught me more than I could ever teach him, Eleanor replied, smiling as Leo triumphantly held up the completed project. By late August, Leo had completed his final scheduled treatment cycle. The doctors used words like promising and excellent response, though they were careful to emphasize that monitoring would continue indefinitely. To celebrate this milestone, Eleanor organized a small gathering at the cabin. Maria and Leo, of course, but also several nurses who had become dear friends, Eleanor's children and their families, and even Dr. Patel, who arrived bearing a professional-grade telescope as his gift to Leo. Under a perfect summer sky, they toasted Leo's health and resilience. The boy seemed transformed from the pale, solitary figure Eleanor had first encountered in the hospital cafe nearly a year ago. Though still thin, his cheeks had filled out, and a dusting of dark hair had begun to reclaim his scalp. As twilight descended and the party began to disperse, Eleanor found Leo sitting alone on the dock that extended into the pond, his feet dangling in the water. "Everything okay?" she asked, settling beside him. Leo nodded, his expression contemplative. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now. Last summer I thought I might die." The blunt statement caught Eleanor off guard, though she had grown accustomed to Leo's directness. "Were you very frightened?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not anymore. Now I have too many things I want to do." "Like visiting Europa?" Eleanor smiled, recalling their first conversation. "Eventually. But first I want to finish school and maybe become a doctor like Dr. Patel, or a telescope engineer. Or maybe both." He kicked his feet, creating ripples in the dark water. "Ms. Eleanor? Can I ask you something important?" "Of course, anything." Leo turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Would it be okay if I called you Grandma instead of Miss Eleanor? Since I don't have one, and you don't have grandkids, and we're kind of like family now anyway." Eleanor felt her breath catch, a wave of emotion rising so swiftly she couldn't speak for a moment. "I would be honored," she finally managed, her voice thick. "Truly honored." Leo's smile blazed brighter than any star they had observed together. "Good. Because I already told my friends at the hospital that my grandma has a cabin in the mountains where you can see the Milky Way." That night, after everyone had departed and Leo was asleep, Eleanor sat on the deck alone, wrapped in the quilt Richard had always claimed was the perfect weight for stargazing. She gazed up at the familiar constellations, feeling Richard's absence and presence simultaneously, a paradox she had finally learned to embrace rather than resist. "He called me Grandma today," she whispered to the star-filled sky. "After all those years of hoping for children, for grandchildren. Life has such strange and beautiful detours, doesn't it?" The years that followed unfolded with unexpected richness. Leo remained in remission, growing from a curious boy into a thoughtful teenager with a passion for both astronomy and medicine. Eleanor converted one of the cabin bedrooms into a permanent space for him, filled with books, telescopes, and the model rockets they built together during school breaks. Maria eventually secured a better-paying position as a nurse practitioner, allowing her to reduce her punishing work schedule. Though she and Leo maintained their apartment in the city, they spent increasingly more time at the cabin, especially during summers and holidays. For Eleanor's 70th birthday, Leo, now 15 and nearly as tall as she was, organized a surprise gathering at the cabin, secretly coordinating with Eleanor's children and grandchildren. She had 2 now, twins born to her son and daughter-in-law 3 years earlier. "Speech!" someone called after the cake had been served and the candles extinguished. Eleanor rose, looking around at the faces of those gathered, her children and their spouses, her biological grandchildren, Maria and Leo, who watched her with those same intense dark eyes that had first caught her attention in a hospital cafe 6 years earlier. "When my husband died, I thought my life was essentially over," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "I had no purpose, no joy, no reason to get out of bed each morning. I existed, but I wasn't living." She paused, meeting Leo's gaze with a smile. "And then one day, while waiting for a plumber who was running late, I met a young boy with an extraordinary knowledge of Jupiter's moons and an even more extraordinary capacity for hope." Laughter rippled through the gathering. "What I've learned over these past 6 years is that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about who stays beside you through the hardest times. It's about who makes you want to be better, stronger, more present in this world." Her voice wavered slightly. "It's about love in all its unexpected forms." Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Leo approached her with a small, carefully wrapped package. "One more gift," he said, pressing it into her hands. Eleanor unwrapped it to find a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon. Tiny blue stones were embedded in the surface, catching the light like the reflections from a distant ocean. "It's beautiful," she breathed, immediately fastening it around her neck. "I had it custom-made," Leo explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "To remind you of how we met and how you saved me." Eleanor shook her head gently. "Leo, you have it backward. You saved me." The truth of this statement would reveal itself more literally 2 years later, when Eleanor, now 72 and still remarkably active, suffered a heart attack while alone at the cabin during the early spring. Leo, who had arrived for a surprise weekend visit after completing a prestigious science competition, found her collapsed on the kitchen floor, unresponsive, but still breathing. With the remarkable calm of someone who had spent much of his childhood in hospitals, the 17-year-old immediately began CPR, his trained hands moving with confident precision as he called 911 on the cabin's landline, propping the phone against his shoulder while continuing compressions. "My grandmother is 72 with no previous cardiac history," he informed the dispatcher with clinical detachment that belied his internal panic. "She's unresponsive but has a weak pulse. I've started CPR and established an airway." The paramedics later told Maria that Leo's immediate intervention and textbook-perfect CPR had almost certainly saved Eleanor's life during those critical minutes before the ambulance could navigate the remote mountain roads to reach them. In the hospital, the same one where they had first met, Eleanor awoke to find Leo slumped in a chair beside her bed, his lanky frame somehow folded into the uncomfortable hospital furniture, dark circles beneath his eyes, suggesting he had maintained his vigil through the night. "Leo," she whispered, her voice raspy from the intubation she had undergone during surgery. He jerked awake instantly, relief washing over his features as he leaned forward to take her hand. "You're awake! How do you feel? Are you in pain?" "The doctor said the stents are working well and your vitals have been stable for 12 hours. Eleanor managed a weak smile at his rapid-fire medical assessment. "I'm okay," she assured him. "Thanks to you, from what I understand." Leo shrugged, suddenly looking younger than his 17 years. "I just remembered my training. Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone," Eleanor said softly. "It was you, my Leo, my grandson." His eyes filled with tears then, the composed exterior crumbling to reveal the frightened boy beneath. "I thought I was going to lose you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I can't lose you, Grandma." "Oh, sweetheart." Eleanor tugged his hand, pulling him closer until his head rested against her shoulder, mindful of the IV lines and monitoring equipment. "I'm still here. We're still here." As she stroked his dark hair, so much thicker now than during those illness-ravaged childhood years, Eleanor marveled at the circular nature of their story. A lonely widow had befriended a sick child, never imagining that the child would grow up to save her life, not just in the literal sense of that dramatic day, but in all the quiet, cumulative ways he had restored her purpose, her joy, her reason for being fully present in the world. In the hospital corridor, Maria watched through the window as grandmother and grandson clung to each other, their bond transcending biology, forged instead through shared vulnerability, mutual healing, and the simple, profound miracle of showing up for one another day after day. A nurse paused beside her, following her gaze. "Family?" she inquired. Maria smiled, recognizing the truth that had been evident from that very first meeting in a hospital cafe nearly 8 years ago. "Yes," she replied with absolute certainty. "They're family."